which now I said, as we were on Thursday, it was being released like within hours of when I talked to you. It did get released. I want to tell you what happened here right now. So, here we go. The Mueller report, remember, it is a 400-page document. This report started 2 years ago looking into whether Donald Trump, why he fired the head of the FBI, if there were any crimes involved. This is a really big deal. It is such a big deal that when Trump heard that he was being investigated, this was his reaction. So it's not a small thing. Like the Mueller report, people have waited for 2 years to find out what's going to happen. Okay, so let's break this down. The actual Mueller report was investigating two things that might be crimes. Here they are real briefly. The first one is, did Donald Trump's campaign work with Russia to get him elected president? We know that Russia was involved. They meddled in our election. That definitely happened. But if Trump's people worked with Russia, like coordinated with them, that is a federal crime. People go to jail for that. Presidents can be impeached for that. It's a big deal. And the second issue was called obstruction of justice. If Trump did anything to stop the investigation, if he fired anybody or told people not to cooperate or hid information, those are all impeachable crimes too. Those are the only two things the report looked at, but they're big things, okay? So with that in mind, on Thursday, after we stopped talking to each other, the Attorney General of the United States, this guy right here, went in front of the White House and said, we will not be filing any charges against the president at this time, which was a really big moment. Essentially, Donald Trump was not going to be charged with any crimes. Boom, that happened. Donald Trump celebrated this a few minutes later by tweeting a Game of Thrones meme to the nation, which he said, no collusion, no obstruction, game over. That's the President of the United States tweeting a meme in victory celebration. And that happened on Thursday. This, by the way, he then got sued by HBO, which says that that's copyright infringement. You can't use the Game of Thrones logo. So HBO sued the president for tweeting a meme, but we aren't even going down that road today. So let's forget about that and move on to the actual obstruction. Now, you gotta remember that before we go any further, this guy right here, the Attorney General, he was hired by Donald Trump a month ago when Trump fired the old Attorney General. So if that makes you suspicious of what's going on here, it's certainly worth keeping in mind. But what's amazing is the stuff they didn't talk about that day. So over the weekend, the actual report came out. I read a bunch of it, and then I found out, like, basically there's those two counts. And it's why he didn't get charged. That's such a big deal, right? So let's take them one at a time. So Russia conspiracy for the election. He wasn't charged with this, but the reason for it is incredible, which is that it turns out that the Russian government asked Trump's people to work with them, and Trump's people wanted to work with them, but they just couldn't coordinate. They just couldn't figure it out. And a good example of this was this guy. You want to remember who this is? This is Michael Cohen. That's Trump's personal attorney. Now, he's in jail right now, but before he was, he was contacted by the Russian government, by this guy named Dmitry Klokov. Now, Klokov contacted Cohen, left him an email, and said, we should work together so I can help get Trump elected. Now, Cohen agreed, and if he had contacted him back, that would have been a federal crime. But the problem is that Cohen couldn't find a way to reach him. He didn't have an email, he didn't have a phone number, so what Michael Cohen did, this is real life, is that he just Googled the guy's name, Dmitry Klokov. And when he Googled his name, he found contact information, but the problem is that when you search this in Google, which I did this morning, this guy does not pop up. He's a Russian secret agent. The guy that pops up is a famous Russian weightlifter. This guy right here, totally different guy, doesn't work for the government, and that's who Michael Cohen started to talk to, which of course does not help him at all. So it means that the Russian government was talking to Cohen, and at the same time, Cohen was talking to Russian Wolverine, and no one was actually communicating with each other. That's why Trump isn't being charged with the crime. It's not that they didn't want to, they just didn't figure out how to do it properly. So that was amazing. And that's only the first count. So the second one is more incredible, and that is obstruction of justice. Does Trump do anything to obstruct justice? And the answer again was no, but the reason for it is amazing, which is that apparently Donald Trump, when we look at what he actually did, we know that he fired the head of the FBI the day after the investigation started. That by itself might be impeachable. We may see that happen in the next year or two. But did he do anything else? That was the big report. Was there anything else that he did that could have been considered obstruction? And the incredible thing in the report is that it wasn't just this, and it wasn't just a few other things. The report listed 14 things that Donald Trump did to try and stop the investigation from happening. 14, which each of them by themselves might be a felony. Now, they didn't pursue any charges, but those things still happened. And so, and a good example of this is that the problem was a lot of these things, if you notice, attempted to, tried to, all of those things meant that he was trying to stop the investigation, but he couldn't. And the reason for it is that apparently multiple people that worked for him refused to carry out his orders. These are 10 people that all worked for Donald Trump. He told them to do something, and they just ignored him and didn't do it. That means the President of the United States gave them an order, and they were like, no, we're not going to do that, and they simply didn't do the illegal thing that he asked them to. That would be like if I asked all of you individually to murder someone, and you all were like, no, Mr. Johnson, I'm not going to kill someone from you, then I am not guilty of murder, but I still asked 30 people to go murder someone. That's kind of what's happening in this situation. That's why it's such a big deal. A good example of this is the White House lawyer, a man named Don McGahn. Apparently the president told him to shut down the investigation. McGahn, knowing that was illegal and could go to jail for that, refused to do it and even decided he was going to quit his job. He was going to resign that day. And in the report, this all comes directly from the report, he actually called his lawyer, drove to the White House, packed up his office, resigned, and then told the chief of staff the president had asked him to, quote, do crazy shit, and that was why he was going to quit his job. That all happened. That is amazing. And in this case, Trump asked this man here, Lewandowski, to file a secret message with the Attorney General, which presidents are not allowed to do. So Lewandowski refused to do it. He just ignored the president, and he told his aide to do it, and his aide also ignored the order. So like, it's that he kept asking illegal things, but no one did them. And that's where we're at right now. The last thing I want to leave you with is that obstruction of justice, the actual charge, is related to 3 things. If you do any of these 3 things, you can go to prison for obstruction of justice. That means if you block an investigation, if you know that you're acting corruptly or doing the wrong thing, and if you know there was an active investigation going on at the time, all of those define obstruction. So that means for each of those 14 items, if you answered yes to any of those, on any of these different categories, that could possibly be a crime. And the problem was, there's a lot of yeses. So what happens at this point? Like, we know that the Department of Justice is not going to go ahead and pursue charges, but that's not the end of the report. Because remember, the whole Department of Justice works for Donald Trump. Who could still bring him to court? It is. It is Congress's job. And if they do that, that's called impeachment. And maybe that's where we're going. We're going to find out, ladies and gentlemen. All right? That's it for current events.